From the people who help you know your competition, InteliChek presents the Multi-Point Inspection Podcast. The Multi-Point Inspection Podcast brings you news and stories from the automotive world told in an informative and entertaining way. You could say that Dan Shine was destined to become a journalist.
I was born into a newspaper family. My father worked at a newspaper for 45 years, rising from fetching coffee for reporters to walking out the door 45 years later as a publisher. So I spent a lot of time in newspaper offices, hanging out with these weird characters, reporters and photographers. And so that was kind of my growing up. And my two older brothers went into journalism like I did. So it was a household with not a lot of great science and math being done, but we sure as hell could write and spell well. Landed in Dallas and covered all sorts of things from, crime and courts and fires and mayhem to the Cowboys going to the Super Bowl, that kind of stuff. And then moved back to my hometown in Detroit and worked there for 8 years, same kind of stuff, just writing a variety of things. And then my wife was in newspapers too, so we decided we needed to diversify a little bit. And so I went into kind of the higher ed sector and did communications at a university for a while. Now I'm back.
And he's back as senior editor at Automotive News, which does a terrific job in using a multimedia approach to get the news out to its audience, whether it be in print, digital, podcasts, or video. Journalism isn't dead, according to Dan. It just has a new look.
I'm Dan Shine, senior editor at Automotive News. I majored in journalism at Michigan State, did a couple internships in Rochester, New York, and Orange County, California, and got my first job in Dallas. I wouldn't say soon after graduating, but it was my older brothers and sisters. Like I graduated on Saturday and I went to work on Monday, but mine was a little bit longer.
Dan arrived in Dallas when both the newspaper industry and the town's professional football team were at the top of their game.
I worked in Dallas from 1988 to 1995. I mean, it was a great newspaper, and it was a little bit of a newspaper war still because there was a competing Dallas Times-Herald for a while, but we kind of put them out of business maybe a couple of years after I arrived. And it was extreme growth for the Dallas Morning News at the time. We won a bunch of Pulitzers while it was there. We just kind of, the first time the Cowboys went back to the Super Bowl, I was one of 32 people who went to the Super Bowl to cover it in some form or fashion, which is just kind of insane that, and the resources that, and the money they spent. We sold a bunch of advertisers, sold a bunch of newspapers because people love the Cowboys, but it was an insane time, but it was great. It was a lot of fun.
And during this golden age of newspaper reporting, Dan says that there was never a dull moment.
Kind of, in many ways, you had kind of a front row seat to a lot of history being made, even on the local level, on the national level, sometimes on the global level. It was, it was exciting. Every day was different. Like one day I walked in Dallas and it was when the Murrah building bombing happened down in Oklahoma City. And they said, get on a plane and go to Michigan because there was a Michigan connection to it. I had the clothes on my back and that was all I had. And I went to the airport. It was much colder in Detroit. And so I called one of my sisters who lived along the freeway on the way to, what they call the thumb area of Michigan. And I said, give me some clothes. So I met her on the side of the highway and she, had sweatshirts and a coat and stuff and drove up and, spent 4 or 5 days in kind of the farmland around, Michigan, talking to people who lived near this person who was suspected of being involved in that bombing. So, always interesting.
During the mid-2000s is when I first noticed the internet hurting newspapers with digital content such as blogs. I myself had a brief stint as a newspaper reporter in 2005, and you could tell a change was coming. But Dan says his decision to get out of the newspaper game around that time had more to do with his family's quality of life than any changes happening in the industry.
When I left newspapers in 2004 to go work at the University of Michigan, it wasn't, it was just kind of more, my wife and I started having a family, and, newspapers, there's like, you don't come at 5 o'clock and close the door. I mean, there are things that happen. So you're on call really 24 hours a day. So it's a little bit, crazy. So we kind of said, well, let's at least one of us have a kind of a more simple kind of career where that, 5 o'clock I can shut the office door and go home. But I didn't think I'd ever get back in the newspaper business. But, Automotive News, called, a friend called and said he had an opportunity, not necessarily for me, but it's like, if you know anybody. And I was kind of like, well, that sounds kind of interesting to me.
Dan says Automotive News has done a great job of blending old school journalism with the current means of getting information out to the public.
And where I work at Crane Communication, which owns Automotive News, they've kind of found a good mix of the journalism and also kind of that commercial space to remain profitable. We have a pretty stout print subscriber base. It's declining, but not as rapidly as other print publications. And so, but we've definitely shifted our focus into a more, a digital mindset. My always thinking was that I had a nephew who was getting into the journalism business, not that long ago, and he was, journalism is dead or it's dying. But I always kind of thought, if you're able to write well, if you can communicate well, if you can take information and distill it into some kind of readable, sensible sentences and paragraphs, that there will be a job market for you. I love to write. I couldn't add or subtract or do anything like that, but I could write pretty well. And so there's people who hate writing, who can't write. And so there's always, I think, if you can write well, there'll be an opportunity for you to do something. But I think we've kind of adapted, and I write and I edit, and I do podcasts every once in a while, and I do video every once in a while. And so you kind of expand your portfolio a little bit, and keeps you relevant and employed.
And as far as journalism as a whole being dead, Dan says that its role is just as important as ever.
I think there's an important role still to be played by journalism and journalists, that showing up at city council meetings, school board meetings, city commissioner meetings, just to keep people informed on what is happening. And if no one's watching, then who knows what's happening? I think there's still a vital watchdog role to be played.
During my brief tenure as a reporter, the newsroom was one of the most exciting places to be. I loved showing up to work every day. So in a 2024 post-COVID world, I'm curious if newsrooms of days gone by still exist.
Yeah, so I'm in the Crane headquarters right here in downtown Detroit. And so I live about 15 minutes away, so it's a pretty quick drive for me. And so they want everyone to come in a couple, 3 times a week. Wednesdays are kind of the big day where we try and get everybody to come in, the editorial staff. We have, of my 4 reporters, 2 of them, one lives in Virginia, and a couple live a couple hours away from Detroit. And so they don't come in very often, but maybe once a month or so they'll come in for the day. But it's each day we have, some folks in, and they're someone that sits next to me he came to the office every day, even through the pandemic. He said it's the safest place to be. There's nobody here. So, we have a pretty decent sized newsroom. It's a lot of fun. I mean, newsrooms are kind of a little bit of they've calmed down a little bit, but they're fun. There's a lot of joking, a lot of yelling across the room and stuff like that. So it's great to be in here and amongst your colleagues. And then it's so much easier to shout out a question to somebody. Hey, do you know somebody have a phone number for so-and-so? And so it's a lot better than a Zoom call or a Slack message.
As a reporter, the job requires that you become well-versed in a variety of topics. So I asked Dan if writing in the automotive space came naturally or if there was a learning curve.
The curve continues to this day. I'm always looking up Google and stuff. What does that acronym stand for and things like that. When I worked at newspapers, I wrote about everything. And you become an expert for a day. You become the expert by asking questions, and like you said, being curious. Explain that to me. And a lot of times I'm like, explain it to me like I'm a 5-year-old, because I don't, And so for automotive, I'm luckily you get surrounded by some, good people, that are just, very friendly, want to be helpful. And so every once in a while I'll call somebody or text somebody, a service manager or service director I know, and say, I heard this, or can you explain this to me? We had something recently about how something was calculated, how some kind of like profit calculate was done. And we weren't sure which way. So I texted a couple of dealer principals I know and said, when you calculate this, do you do it by this or do you use this? And so unfortunately I got two different answers from them. So I said, I'm not sure. So, but I've been able to go and attend meetings and go to conferences, and you learn, and you just kind of you meet people and you listen to them, and so it just becomes easier. So I wouldn't say that I'm an authority or an expert yet. I keep learning new stuff every day, but it's gotten a lot better.
So what does a day in the life of Dan Shine look like at Automotive News?
So I oversee, we have 4 reporters and who cover retail technology, F&I. I got 2 reporters who cover F&I, and someone who covers the used car wholesale auction end of things. And then for service and parts, I have a group of freelancers who will send me stories. So typical morning, I'll check in once a week with each reporter. What are you working on? What's coming up the next week? That kind of thing. And so then, I kind of know what to prepare for. And the morning, I'll, if I got stories, I'll edit some stories and move them along to be edited by the copy desk and then put online. 10 a.m. we have a meeting every morning at 10 a.m. with all the editors. We get together. Okay, what's everybody got? What's going to go online today? And we try and, put up, 15 or stories or so on the website, every day. And so we'll talk about that. Then we'll have another meeting twice a week where we'll talk about the print issue. Okay, what's going in the print? What's the possible page 1 story? What's going to be on page 3, page 4? And then, so we'll repeat that every day throughout the week. I'll talk, with my reporters, how I just, I heard about this. I'm going to thinking about writing something about that. I said, okay, sounds good. When you're going to send it to me, and this kind of thing. So it's the constant, every day I'm, getting stories in from my reporters, editing them, moving them along. I help publish an F&I newsletter every Wednesday, service and parts newsletter every Thursday, which as we record this Thursday, I have to write a couple items up. The newsletter is going to be a little bit late. And so I'll write a couple things as well, and we'll move that newsletter, send it out a little bit later this afternoon. So just daily getting stories in, talking with reporters, sending stories back, I got a question about this. And, so it's a kind of little back and forth, and then move them along, put them up on the website, things like that.
And Dan says that he has a very proactive team of reporters surrounding him.
Yeah, they're very good, and they have to be, because I can't be looking, and feeding them stuff. It's on them, and they're great. They have their own set of sources. They're reading stuff. They're on Facebook groups of whether it be F&I managers, things like that. And we get pictures from PR people, press releases about different things going on in the industry. And so maybe we might turn a story out of a recent study or a survey, things like that. And so they'll say, I got this email today about this new survey about how many people are late paying their car payments or whatever. And that could be a good story. Oh yeah, that sounds good. And so we'll talk a little bit about that. What elements to include, who we should talk to, if we should have a chart that goes with it, things like that. For the service and parts, it's a little bit, because I have all freelancers. And so a lot of that is me giving story ideas to them. I had a freelancer from the Miami area call yesterday, and I said, okay, I got a story for you. He's been bugging me. You got anything for me? So I found a story for you. And I told them what it was about. Here's the person to call. Here's kind of what I'm looking for from the story. Here's what I think, the question is, what I'm curious to learn about it, and then they'll go out, write it, send it back to me. So for service and parts, I'm a little bit more actively handing out story ideas. I love the freelancers who come to me and say, I've got an idea for a story. And then it's, it just makes my life easier.
We'll learn about what type of stories Dan enjoys most, the hot topics in automotive for 2024, and more after a word from our sponsor. Perception is not always reality.
And, there's this perception that the dealerships are more expensive for everything. And InteliChek kind of confirms that that's not the case.
InteliChek helps dealerships become aware of where their prices stand in regard to their competitors.
And InteliChek does a good job of giving us that pricing data to confirm that we're in the market.
And this allows dealerships to make their customers aware of their competitive pricing.
I placed 2 placards in the business center so they could see that while they're over there working on computers. Also placed it in our coffee area. We have a glass wall there, so when they walk in, as they're putting their creamer and sugar in their coffee, they're going to look up and see the pricing for our pricing as well as our competitors.
Introducing InteliShare. InteliShare contains all of InteliChek's promotional tools that you can use to promote your favorable prices, including InteliAds, the printable flyers that you can show off in easel displays, InteliMedia for your digital media boards, and InteliWidgets, so you can show off price comparisons on your website and even let your customers schedule from the widget.
Just having access to that data that they're able to provide gives us a good plan of how we're going to proceed.
Call 877-827-7273 or go to InteliChek.com to find out more about how the InteliShare series can help you grow your business.
I mean, I think the ones that are the best practices type things, they're the innovative, creative things that people are doing. You know, the one I mentioned about the writer in Miami, it's about a dealership that they're going to buy tools for all their techs. A lot of technicians have to come in with their own toolbox. And then there's been a lot of programs where graduating techs might get a starter kit, that kind of thing. But this dealership said, you know, we think this is a good recruitment tool. This is a good retention tool. When you show up day one, there's going to be a whole full set of tools that are yours to put in your bay. And so that's a kind of an interesting story. It's someone trying to do something different to improve their recruitment and their retention of employees. So those kind of stories that show innovative, creative people at work, are the ones that really I think I like and I think readers like.
And speaking of people doing innovative and creative things, I mentioned to Dan that I had just interviewed Arnold Gassita with Petra Cares for episode 32 of the Multi-Point Inspection podcast.
I met Arnold a year or so ago at an event in San Antonio, and he kind of told me about this. We had a little cocktail hour, and I was like, okay, we're gonna write about this. Like, this is a great story, and we did. I wrote something recently about they're expanding it out into LA, which I'm sure he told you about. It's a great organization and a great program, and it's not self-serving for him. He doesn't own a dealership. He doesn't need technicians, but he saw a need and he wanted to help. And he's just a big-hearted person. He's a great human being. So that was a great story.
So what are some of the hot topics in automotive that Dan is seeing in 2024?
Well, I think there's the old standbys of getting enough technicians. If you don't have enough technicians, you're losing money every day. And then, how do you find them? How do you keep them? I think, those are just, those have been issues for years, and I think they'll continue to be for a while. You mentioned Ed Roberts and the mobile service. I think finding ways to better engage customers, how they want to be dealt with, whether, again, that goes from like texting and video MPIs to potentially mobile service of people like that. I think service departments still struggle in certain places with wait times. I can't get you in till in 2 weeks or something like that. And as Ed made the point to me, or I'll send a van out to your house tomorrow or to your office building. We'll diagnose it. If we need parts, we'll order them, and then we'll come back out the next day and we'll fix it for you. Or do you want to wait 2 weeks to get into the shop? So I think finding ways to better retain customers, to keep them loyal with a great customer service is just kind of one of those age-old things that dealership service departments are dealing with. New vehicle inventory is improving. Before there was not a lot of new vehicles used, so that pushed people into the used market. Used prices went up. There's more of inventory now, but I think interest rates are still kind of keeping a lot of people on the sidelines. But yeah, used was through the roof not that long ago, and it's kind of now, I would say, normalized or even a little bit below normal. So they've kind of flattened out. There was a little bit of a bump when people got their tax returns and used that to go buy a car, whether new or used. I've got 2 college kids home who need transportation to jobs, and so I'm in the used market myself, and so hopefully prices will stay down a little bit for a while. But I think they've kind of steadied and back to kind of more normal levels.
The The Multipoint Inspection Podcast is currently working on a special report that will air in coming weeks concerning the Right to Repair Act. So I thought I would ask Dan while I had him for his expertise on this matter.
I did a story there's a firm here in the Michigan, Detroit area called Ducker Carlisle, and they do a lot of benchmarks surveys. They work with a lot of OEMs on technician benchmark surveys, service advisors, do a lot of great, really informative work. They looked into the right to repair, and the OEMs were pumping millions and tens of millions of dollars into like fighting this. And this researcher was like, don't even bother. If you're a good deal and you're a fair price and you treat them well, they're going to come to you. It doesn't, who has all the data shared, it doesn't matter. If you treat customers well, just, stop spending the millions of dollars and just work on your customer service and it won't matter. And he said, you're just kind of wasting money, kind of throwing at the wrong thing. So.
I asked how Automotive News is looking to the future and how the publication gets its content to consumers. The main thing, according to Dan, is to meet them where they are, wherever they may be.
Well, I think our approach has evolved. We've got some new leadership in the past, I don't know if it's been a year and a half or so, or 2 years. And it is looking at digital. It's about podcasting. It's about videos, getting the reporters and editors out, on video with their expertise talking about the UAW negotiations or, Stellantis' latest earnings, what they mean, Tesla, So I think there's value, and we see value in our expertise and our people, so it's multi-platform. It's writing for our website. It could be on, our Daily Drive podcast. It can be on our videos and social media. And then all this stuff gets pushed out to social media as well. So I think it's not that traditional of let's write a story and then we're going to wait 6 days and it'll be you can read about it in the paper. It's up and it's up online. You can read it right away. We'll send you an email. We're going to blast things, but also you can hear the reporter or the subject of the story being interviewed on Daily Drive. You can watch videos. You can go to our Instagram, TikTok, and you can, see again our expertise on display through all those multiple platforms. Yeah, there's still people who wait for that, Monday for the Automotive News to land in their dealership or at home and page through it. I mean, I still like to read and hold something and read it, but there are others who want to read it on their phone or their tablet or on their laptop at work. We trying to give it to everybody.
I'd like to thank Dan Shine with Automotive News for this behind-the-scenes insight into automotive journalism. You can find the Multipoint Inspection Podcast on Apple Podcasts, Amazon, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And be sure to subscribe and give us a 5-star rating. It helps with the algorithm thingy. Executive producers for the Multipoint Inspection Podcast are Melissa Marlette and Joe Gibson. It is written, produced, and narrated by me, Brandon Barnett. This episode's featured music is Renegade by The Revolution. And check out the full uncut interview with Dan on InteliChek's YouTube channel, where we go even deeper into the world of newspapers and journalism. InteliChek. Know your competition.